Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Predictive Modeling plus Attachment Scores equals more money raised faster. We've had an incredible response to this topic, and we're really excited to dive into what we have planned today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll make it available to you probably in about a week or so once it's processed and up on our website. We'll be sending out a link, so you'll be able to watch it, share it, rewatch it. Also, as always, we welcome your questions. And probably the best way for you to submit those is to use the questions panel on the lower right side of your webinar control panel there. At any time during the course of the webinar, feel free to shoot your questions our way, and we'll do our best to answer them. There will be a question and answer session at the end of this webinar. If we run out of time, we will follow up with you. I think that's about it. So thanks for attending. Our presenter today is Doug Cogswell, probably known to many of you, President and CEO of Advisor Solutions. He's a real thought leader in this industry. He's spent over 15 years in the BI sector, has extensive experience in strategy consulting, in working with data and data analytics in many sectors, and is uniquely qualified with a engineering degree combined with a business degree to not only steer you in the right direction regarding data analytics, but to help you actually solve your business problems. And so I know he has a lot planned, and let's dive in. Doug, welcome.
Well, thanks, Kim. I'm excited about this webinar. We have a large group attending, and we're going to kind of go through from concept to some really roll up the sleeves, how do you do it. So we're going to focus on what is an attachment score. There's been a lot of blog activity and excitement about this in the industry recently. We're going to go into how do you get one, which variables matter the most, how do you calculate weights. We're actually going to show some equations and formulas and really get into how do you do this with what you've got today. Then we're going to talk about how do you use it to find the most attractive prospects and to set more accurate solicitation targets. So first, what's an attachment score? And at the top, and we mean by attachment score, it's also called affinity score or engagement, the same thing. So just going to read this because I think this really captures it. The idea is to use data to figure out how close a constituent may feel towards your organization. So if someone attends events, sits on a board, gives gifts, clicks on newsletter links, updates their contact information, their son or daughter is admitted or denied admission, they may feel closer than, say, someone who does none of these things. We believe this is something that every fundraising team can and should do, and it should be set up so that the scores update every day. Knowing how your constituents feel toward your organization is time and again one of the most powerful and important factors to determining whether or not they will step up in their giving or participation. Every time we're doing analytics and we run modeling exercises, this kind of affinity attachment is really important to predicting who large donors are. So we need to put this in context. It's clearly not the only thing you look at. So when we look at portfolios, we want to look at the stage continuum, where the prospect is from initial qualification to solicitation. Capacity is very important, and attachment. So these three things all go together. Today we're focusing on attachment. And the goal of an attachment scoring model is to get something that's scientific and statistical to measure and score attachment versus subjective, not reliable, and inconsistent. And we see a lot of cases where, sort of thumbs up, I know Joe went to this dinner, he's up there. Well, but maybe Mark went to 4 other things the year before and you just didn't see it. So we're trying to get this so it's consistent updates all the time and is normalized against the base so it's used by everybody consistently. And so when you look at these things, the goal is have a bunch of observations, event attendance, committee participation, all of that, to build a model to score the entities based on what has happened historically. And generally, you're going to see a distribution. This is numbers of entities that go from low to high. And you'll see we like to see scores that run from 0 to 0.3. These scores often run from 1 to 50, 1 to 6,000, and they might be reversed, so 1's high and 9's low. So they come in all forms. But if you get them into this form, They can be used for factoring against capacity to create expected value. So at the end of this, we're going to get into that a bit, but that's one of the reasons we like to see the range go from 0 to 0.3, 0.33. And statistically, we have shown that if you have this kind of an attachment score, you can use it with capacity to get expected solicitation values. Now, entities, generally, the curve looks something like this. There's a bunch of them down at the bottom who aren't particularly engaged. There's a middle group, and there's a tail of people who are really engaged or attached. If you look at prospects, people have been rated or screened a little bit. Obviously, this becomes more of a bell curve distribution, less of the low-end tail and more of a peak in the middle. So there's more people who are somewhat engaged. There's always going to be this tail that's lightly engaged. And so segmenting these scores makes it easier to understand. So if you looked at this curve, we'd probably break it into 4 groups: low, low, medium, medium, high, and high, and put names on them. This would be owners. You could call them different things, but this creates a handle so people know what you're talking about when you get outside the statistics. The owners are the people who are really highly engaged. Been to lots of activities, every reunion, give all the time. Participants are getting towards owners. Interested parties are moderately engaged, and then there's a group over here that's not engaged at all. And you can put definitions on these, and we'll make these slides available. This is paraphrased from one of our clients. An owner, across multiple affinity subcategories, they identified strongest advocates, benefactors, club members, volunteer leaders. They remain connected in a variety of ways and are vested in our mission and show strong inclination towards supporting. The other end, not engaged, across the same affinity subcategories, they're currently very limited or no real engagement. So, we're going to go through an exercise. We're going to create a ranged score from low to high, and we're going to then put it into a number of buckets that fit that kind of a curve distribution. Then you can put these handles or definitions on them. So once you get it, what do you do with them? There's several use cases. The ones we typically see are, you would do this because in annual giving, you want to identify prospects that are most likely to respond. And generally the ones who are more attached, more engaged, the owners, the participants, are more likely to respond. You also want to think about the messaging, because if you're trying to go after the not engaged people, sending them messages about it's the end of the year, it's time to give, all these affinity reunion kinds of things is not going to appeal to them. They're going to be more interested in responding to a message that catches an interest area, like maybe if they've been a sciences major and they've on your newsletter click through on sciences articles, send them messages about the upcoming investment in the new neuroscience center. So the annual fund is useful for these purposes. Major giving, very useful in prospect assignment. And we'll go through an exercise here. If you have 2 equally rated people and you want to focus on one, focus on the one that's got the higher attachment, much more likely to become a large donor in the near term. You also can target activities for key prospects to increase attachment, because once you know what drives attachment, and it's going to be certain kinds of volunteer opportunities, not all of them, certain kinds of club participation, you want to target and steer your higher prospects into those activities so that they become more attached and engaged over time. So it's a future directional thing it can be used for as well. Event attendance. You want to again find the prospects most likely to respond and balance the right people with the right message. You're going to do something different with highly engaged people who are always clicking through on science articles versus very lightly engaged people who haven't participated in anything. And last, solicitation levels. This is really useful with capacity rating, because the attachment helps become a factor so that equally rated people, the ones with the higher attachment, are much more likely to give more. And we'll go through a mathematical example of that at the end. So a little bit about what these things are. How do I get one? Well, there's a bunch of things that matter, and generally in this order. And this applies, we're talking primarily here about higher education, but the same thing applies to membership-based organizations, hospitals, philanthropic. Volunteer positions are all the time really increase the attachment scores. Reunions attended, giving histories next, consistency, events attended. And again, this may vary. Some events may matter more than others. We'll see that in a minute. In schools, legacy, sons and daughters admitted, a big positive, denied, a big negative, has to be considered. Newsletter click-throughs. This is really current information on people's engagement with an institution, and also by what they're clicking on, their interest area. So not many people are collecting this today, but this can be highly useful. Student sports, student activities. It's a little bit more dated than these top things, but also matters. And current email on file. I mean, these all kind of override that, but at least this is showing they're updating your records. So if you have nothing else, if you have some of this data, and this is really a rough priority setting from top to bottom, you can start working with this. And we're going to do a quick and dirty calculation in a few minutes to show how you would use this. So how much is enough? This comes up all the time. Some of our clients use 5 factors. We've got one client that uses 190 factors, and in a minute we'll see what 5 factors look like versus 190. And I would say, key here is use what you've got. And something is better than nothing. Start simple, refine over time. We have seen cases where people get into, I have to have 190 factors. I don't have the data. I need consultants to come in. I need to build a warehouse. And this can elongate out for a long time and cost a lot of money. I would fathom to say that every one of you has enough data to get going on this now. And we'll go through an example that literally took us an hour to build off some demo data we had from one of our clients to create the factors and go all the way through creating an affinity score and using it. So there's a quick and dirty way of doing this that probably gets 65, 70% of the value. There's the 190 factor version, which gets you up to 80 or 90% of the value. But wow, you can get an awful lot with just a little. So here's an example, client 1 with 5 factors. We've listed 3 of them. Here's client 2 with 190 factors. So the number of volunteer positions in the last 10 years. 2 things. It's a category of activity, and it's time-bounded. It's not 30 years back probably doesn't matter. 20 years back doesn't matter a whole lot. The last few years matters a lot. Well, the way this gets to be 190, instead of number of volunteer positions, number of years they were a class agent in the last 5 years. Class agent is a kind of volunteer position that's probably more aligned towards higher attachment than some others. Then look at the next 5 to 10 years, and if you keep going. Class agent, 10 to 15. Union share, years high school interviewing, 1 to 5, 5 to 10. So this is an example where you could take something like volunteer positions, 1 factor, easy to get, a whole bunch of factors, harder to get, better. But this gets you, if this is 90%, this gets you 65, 70% start here. Number of events attended. The breakdown of this is numbers of presidents forums 1 to 5, number of presidents forums 5 to 10, number of presidents forums 10 to 15, annual benefits, in these different year categories, number of years seasons ticket holder in football, number of years seasons ticket holder in soccer, on and on. So again, a number of years of giving in the last 10, that's a factor. You could break it down into 1 to 5, 5 to 10, average gift 5 years versus prior, going up or down. So I went through this a little bit just to say, we're going to start with something simple, but this can be expanded over time, and we really do recommend start simple and grow it. So a couple of mantras. The best data you have is the data you already have. I mean, almost everybody has something to get started. If you aren't collecting pieces of this, start now, especially event attendance, click-throughs, all of that. Outside consultants and wealth screeners can bring additional capacity information because they do outside wealth screening and data that you don't have in the system. But attachment is almost always internal data. So the issue is collect it and then make good use of it. So let's take a look at where they come from. The score, the attachment score, goes in the entity table. You calculate it here. This is the table that's got the name and the ID, biographical affiliation. So in a minute we'll see that's where the attachment score gets calculated. But in your database, whether you have Banner, Advanced, Razor's Edge, Millennium, Colleague, DataTel, they all have these tables, Homegrown, PeopleSoft. There's a volunteering table for some aspect of it. And in here you can calculate the number of volunteer positions in the last 10 years and copy it into the core table. Events, alumni event attendance, benefits, dinners, all that, copy it into here. Giving, all these giving metrics can be calculated here, copied in here. Admissions for schools, legacy admitted, denied, comes from here, copied in here. Newsletter click-throughs, just click-throughs last 12 months, whatever the factors you want. Student sports. So the thing here is this data exists, and it's not hard to create these factors from these tables and bring them back to create your attachment score. In our world, we did this in about an hour with the demo you're going to see in a minute. We're an in-memory based warehouse that's sort of an analytics sandbox that's easy and light to work with. This can also be done in the databases with a DBA can pretty quickly put some of this together depending on resource load on that side of the house. So once you get the factors, then you have to figure out the weights. So the question is, does volunteer committees matter more than gifts in the last 5 years, and does that matter more than student activities? So we're going to take a run through that. A model will produce some factors. So we ran a model. We'll show you how you built it in a minute. In this case, the number of volunteer committees in the last 10 years contributed 38% of the engagement, attachment, affinity score. Numbers of gifts in the last 5 years, 31%. Numbers of gifts before that, so this is the number of years that they gave out of those potential 5 years, 18%. Student activities, a lot less. Numbers of reunions, less. Numbers of sports. And some of these may be collinear, so the weight was put up in these. But you can get these weighting factors. If you don't have modeling expertise or don't have somebody do this, this is actually reasonably often what we see is the weights if you have these simple factors. So you can just literally build a first model with something like this. If you want to create it with models, what you have to do is figure out a target. What's the behavior you're trying to have? And let's say here it's people who give $100,000 and up. That's what we want to have happen. So then you need a base population that are people you would reasonably expect to give $100,000 and up, and then you want to run the model to figure out how does this attachment factors vary between the people who gave and didn't. So in this case, we'd have a base population of prospects rated $100,000 and up. A model looks at explanatory factors. So in this case, you'd want to remove everything other than the weights of the attachment factors and see what the model does. Let's take a look. We can run one of those pretty quick. So I'm going to just bring up some data. And here we're looking at rating. So there's 166 people who rated a capacity of 50 million or more, and then there's the numbers above 281 who are rated 10 to 50 million. There's a group here of the 100,000 and up rated would be this 7 rating up to this 1 rating. They've got 93,743 people. I want to grab the people with the capacity ratings where they have some potential to give 100,000. There's 26,230 of them. So I get rid of everybody else. So that's my base population. Here I've got my giving totals. This is how much people have actually given. Looks like over here, 4 people have given 25 to 50 million. The numbers run down. A lot of people have given 1 to 5,000. Let's grab the ones who have given 100,000 up, which is these bars on up. So now I have a target, which is the 1,329 people who have given $100,000 and up. And my population that I'm going to do the model against is the roughly 25,000 people who are rated at that level. So I'm going to go through this because it's actually pretty simple to do this. I'm going to go here, build a predictive model. Panel comes up. I click New Model. I'll call Weighting Factors. I'm going to run it against the entity table. These are the tables in the database. Most of you have tables like this. I'm going to do what's called a classification model. We can go in a lot more detail, but I'm trying to pace through this. These are the factors that we calculated in those other tables. It took us about an hour, and then copied them back to the entity table in this advisor project. Numbers of gifts in the last 5 to 10 years. This is going to be a number from 0, no gifts, to 5, 1 in each of the 5 years. We've summed the gifts, so it's the years they've made the gift in, not the numbers of gifts in the year. So it's actually the number of years they've made a gift out of the last the 5 to 10 back. And this is the numbers of gifts, numbers of years they've made a gift in the last 5 years. Numbers of reunions they've attended, number of sports played as a student, number of student activities, number of volunteer committees in the last 10 years. So we just ripped through, created these factors. We've selected them as explanatory fields. Click OK. So this is now running 20 to 25 models. It's going to pick the one that's the best fit to explain how those factors align towards these people who gave more versus the people who didn't give at that level. And here's where I got the factors. It tells me volunteer committees in the last 10 years explain 38%. Gifts in the last 5 years, 31%. This actually makes sense, and these are weights I'm going to use in a minute. One other thing that's interesting is if I click this volunteer committees in the last 10 years, it tells me if they did none, it's a negative correlation with being a $100,000 donor. That makes sense. If they did 1, it's a positive factor. So there's a big step from not doing anything to doing 1. Then what it tells me is actually interesting. This grouped 2 to 10 in 1 bucket. That means that once you've done 1, doing 2 or more is about the same correlation. So it doesn't, if you did 2 or 6 or 5, once you clear the 1, this is the same. So the modeling actually helps me create these groups. So if I had the modeling tool, I could now, this model would run a much richer scoring than I'm going to run in my quick and dirty in a second. It would take literally, put the people in these buckets and score it all these different ways and create a range score for this group. But we're going to drop out of this and go back to the storyline and do the quick and dirty. So that was a run through how you can get weights, starting with just, these are fairly standard and typical to go into a modeling tool and look at your own data, which is better, and examine these lift buckets, which is even better. So with those numbers, number of volunteer committees was 38%, and the numbers actually ran from no volunteer committees to the maximum numbers of committees somebody had been in 10 years was 10. So to start this, you just call it $100, $100 per participation. So every volunteer committee gets a weight of 100. So then years of giving in the last 5, that contributed 30.8%, and the lowest you could be was none, no years, and the highest would be you gave a gift in each of the last 5 years. So you have to take the 100 you pegged here, ratio it by the weights, because it gets less weight. It gets 30.8% instead of 38, and then there's less of them, so each one has to be weighted up because you can only have 5 and there were 10 here. So this gives you, per each year of giving, a weight of 162. And then you can do the number of years of giving 5 to 10, 17.8% factor, or 0 to 5, so you do the same calculation. So basically each of those factors gets a weight, 100 for one of these, 162, 93, and so on. So then you can create an attachment score, raw score. This is literally the formula we used, number of volunteer committees in the last 10 times 100 plus number of gifts times 162, and you get an output that looks like this. Let's take a look at it. So I'm opening up a project with the actual data in it. And you'll see in a minute that that simple calculation actually can be quite valuable. So here we're showing the scores, the raw scores in a list. Let's hide this. So Rose Stevenson, a 6 rated, has given $82,000, came out with a score of 2,375 because he had 10 volunteer committees, very active. He's made gifts in each of the last 5 years, gifts in each of the 5 years before that, 2 student activities, 7 reunions, and 2 sports. You can sort of see they run down from high in the bottom. This list is going to be a bunch of zeros. Just scanning the list, a couple things jump out. I've got here, for example, Beulah Hopper is not rated, but boy, he's been really active in volunteer committees, made gifts consistently, active as a student in reunions. I'd probably want to take a look at this, the rating here, because maybe there's something going on, but this is certainly an advocate. Might want to also look at, are there people who have made no gifts? Let's sort by the gifts, reverse sort it. So here's people that have made no gifts. But boy, some of them have been pretty active in volunteer committees. 2, 3, in this case, 3. Here's somebody who's rated $50,000 to $100,000, has been active, but has never made a gift. I might want to follow up on that person and see what's up. So that's just an example of, we did the calculation. Quickly on the list, we can start looking at it. But what we want to do next, generally we want to normalize the score. I said at the beginning, we kind of like these ranging from 0 to 0.3, and they're better in buckets. And kind of here's the distribution, but you get a better handle on it. This is the segmentation. So down at the bottom is the formula we use to create these buckets. If the attachment score was between, divided by 2375, so we took the 33 and then we said 0.3, and then so we create groupings out of it. And this just gives you this better handle. It's a segmentation idea. These would be the owners, the participants, the not engaged. So let's take a look at this. So this is sort of how you would take this all the way forward and use it. And so, where we've gone so far, there's some process and there's some math in here that you ought to be able to use to take your existing data and get started with something like this, and then create groupings like this. So now, say I'm the prospect management lead, and I'm trying to set a portfolio. And again, I've got my capacity rating here. Here are my attachment scores. Here's the 0.02, the low group, the not engaged. Up at the 0.3, the owners, there's only 34 of them. So let's do the same thing we did before. Take our high-rated prospects. the 100,000 and up group, again, sweep over them. 26,000 people, get rid of everybody else. Now let's grab the ones who are really engaged, the 0.2 and the 0.3, the owners and the interested parties, sweep over them. There's 4,516, 100,000 up rateds who are really engaged. And now I've got staffing for them. They are, let's slide this up a little bit. You can see the staffing. Tanner Tinker's got 168 of them and so forth. But here's a group that are not staffed. There's no staff name next to them. There's 1,970 of these people who are high-rated, really highly attached or engaged and not staffed. So I've dropped to them to see where they live on a map. So I'm sort of exploring that group. Boy, they're scattered all around. There's a group out here in the Bay Area. Looks like I've got 28 of them in San Francisco, and my VP is going out there. Let's circle that group, get rid of everybody else. So now I've got, go to the giving history. I've got 113 people who are rated 100,000 and up, highly engaged, live in the Bay Area. And here's been their giving. There's a couple of large donors. It's a huge group here who have given 1,000 to 10,000 bucks. Let's grab them. I'm just mining into this. I've got 63 people there. And I can sort of see as a group their giving's gone up pretty consistently over time. Let's drop down to that. Go back to the first page of this. There's 63 people. I can now go down here, export the list out to my desktop, save it as list for trip. And I'm out of here, and I have the list out. So that's a pretty good run-through of how you would use something like this to use the attachment scores combined with the ratings and maybe the giving history to hone a list down into a target group. And obviously, if I want to now look at the raw attachment scores of these 63, I can go over here. This is before I bin them. They kind of, the highest one here is 1637, 3 volunteer committees, gifts in the last 10 years, no student activities, a lot of reunions. I'm getting a feel here for what makes up the score too, which is important because these are being driven by different things, and I'm kind of can look right here at the data and get kind of the lowdown on it. So let's go back to the storyline. This is a situation where we use those scores to get answers and lists quickly, very collaborative. It leverages today's data. These things are, in our world, are going to be updated daily. So if somebody accepted a new volunteer committee position, went to a reunion, the score would jump the next day. No help needed. It's just there and in this very easy way to get at it. And you get clear action plans. And we've got a number of our clients who use this exact approach and found new million-dollar donors they weren't considering before because they're finding these people are highly engaged or attached who have other characteristics that are attractive and get them into the dialogue. So we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to now look at using the attachment score to calculate expected values for each prospect. This is a concept that's in use at a number of our clients, and it's proven quite valuable to get the right ask levels. So the ask is, the dollar value of the issued proposals. We're going to calculate an expected value, which is taking this capacity rating times the attachment score, which is how much is a prospect worth. 2 uses. Is the ask in line with the prospect expected capacity? And for a group of prospects, how much might I be able to raise from them in, say, 7 years? So this is useful if I have a pool of people and maybe they're the football alums, I can value the reasonable amount of money that I expect to get from that group of football alums and know is it $50,000, $500,000, $1 million. It's not just the capacity rating because if they're not engaged, they're not going to give. If they're heavily engaged, they're much more likely to give. So you need both of these to figure that kind of a thing out. So let's take a look at it, how this would work. So here's a prospect manager with a pool of a dozen or so prospects. John Smith is the prospect manager. One of his prospects is Jim Major. There's a $1 million ask out. There's an A1 rating. And so he's, out of this pool, John has 3 asks out totaling $1.15 million. To take this the next step, we have to quantify the capacity. So maybe an A1 is a range of $10 million plus. We put a $14 million value on it. A3 is a range of 1 to 10, put a $3 million. Usually about a third the way into these ranges is the way you want to set the numeric value for this kind of calculation. So this gives you a feel for, on a raw capacity basis, what these people should be asked or able to give, but we need to add in the attachment. So here's a case. This is actually an example of where the attachment score is called an affinity score, and it's a reverse. 1 is actually high. This came from a wealth screener. 9 is low. So you have to convert these scores whether they were our form of range score, which went from 0 to 2375, or this score, which goes from the high is 1 and the low is 9 into these factors. The high should be about a third, and then the low, which is a 9, 0.03. So again, that's the normal range for how to use an affinity score, an attachment score, against a capacity rating to create an expected value. So when you do that, you take the numeric capacity, multiply it by the affinity score, and you get a number. And then I'm just going to flip it around and put the expected value next to the asks. And this starts driving a conversation. John's $1 million ask to Jim Major, $1 million expected value of 406 looks maybe a little low. Why? Well, it's a 10 million capacity rating and a really strong engagement. This is an owner. So you might have a conversation with Jim. Maybe you're under asking. You go down, here's Mary Morgan, 50,000 asked, the expected value is 19,000. Well, the capacity rating is okay, 500,000 to 1 million, but it's a 9. This is a non-engaged alum, 0.03. So you'd have to start asking some questions. If this person is not engaged, are they really likely to give in the capacity range we have for them? So this is where at the ask level, this starts driving some discussions. We need to also look at the portfolio level. So typically, the math here would be to take the expected value and divide by a number of years, usually 7. And if there's a liquidity rating, you could create some spread. But if you just divide by 7, what actually happens is you get more of a pool value, because look at this, you don't ask everybody every year. So you can't take the sum of the expected value and compare to the ask amounts to get a value for a pool. It doesn't make any sense because you're not asking everybody every year. On average, these are like 7-year numbers. So the 7-year, which is dividing the expected value simply by 7, it's a rough cut, quick and dirty, gives you this current year expected value, which sums up to 1.3 million, which you can compare with the ask totals of 1.1 million. And you generally like to see a 2 to 3 times coverage here because, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, these things are actually going to get closed. So this looks a little thin. If you're actually trying to get this out of the portfolio, this is not the coverage ratio you'd like to see. So this is useful. To summarize, the attachment score helps with the expected value, which helps at the individual prospect ask amount and also looking at the pool values. 2 more slides on this. So when we look at major giving coaching and performance metrics, there's a set of things we usually like to look at. Do they have a good number of active prospects? How many visits are they making? Of their prospects, how many are they actually touching meaningfully in a year? Should be 70% plus. Is the pool balanced? Do they have the right coverage ratio? Are they moving? Is the yield on the solicitations good? And that attachment factor is key to getting the prospect pool balance right and also looking at the ask coverage ratios. And here's an example of a visual display where you've taken a pool. It's called a heat map, and there's different groups. This whole area is leadership giving. This is VP of development. Each of these blocks is a prospect, a major gift officer. Nancy Berrios, John Brown. And we're sizing them by what their value of their asks are, and we're coloring them by that coverage ratio. So red is a bad coverage ratio. The ratio of the ask to the expected value is very low, close to 0. Green is really good. It's up around 3. So here in this pool, you've got one person, John Brown, who has a bigger size, so a bunch of proposals out, but bad coverage. And Francesca Peachtree's got awesome coverage. So she's obviously got lower rated prospects or something. So for the same amount out, she's actually doing really well compared to what you'd expect, whereas John probably needs some tips about maybe you can push this up a little bit. So that's where these things start driving the discussion. And then the question is, why are there poor coverage ratios? Maybe John Brown's under asking, or maybe his pool's too big, so he's asking well with the middle level prospects, but he's got some high rated prospects who are not getting pushed through the stages of the pipeline well enough. The pool's too big. Or maybe the capacity ratings were wrong and need to be adjusted. So there's a set of factors. But these kinds of metrics drive those discussions about the portfolio and take it off of the great dinner I had with Joe on Wednesday and, hey, Mark had this great meeting on Sunday. No, your pool looks like your coverage ratios are low, and it looks like you're under asking some of these people. Let's have a discussion about that and how we're going to adjust, because we're leaving money on the table, or this is not the way to be most successful. So it drives strategic discussion and coaching tips. So in summary, we just covered a lot in 30 minutes. We went through what's an attachment score, how do you get one, which variables, how to calculate the weights, how do you use it to find the most attractive prospects to set more accurate solicitation levels. And there's obviously a lot more we could cover, but at a high level, this is what it's about. And just in closing, as we move to questions, I'd say we have seen too many cases where this becomes this big, huge project where I need 190 factors, I need a data mart, I need to do predictive modeling all over the place. Actually, no. I'm willing to bet that each one of you, with the data you have, with the quick and dirty approach, can get attachment scores up and running that could do these kinds of things. And it should take, we do it a lot, so it takes us an hour. It might take a couple of days, but it's not a huge project. And then once you get it, yeah, maybe it's 60, 65% good, but that's a lot better than intuitive, non-scientific. And then you can up that over time. I mean, you might find that the volunteer committees, some of them are much more important than others, so you can create the subcategories. You might find, hey, there's some giving characteristics. Okay, 6 months later, let's create some subcategories. But get to it in pieces. Don't feel that you have to hire expensive consultants and go overboard on this. This really can be a quick and dirty thing that can be implemented into your systems and then used every day in your fundraising. So that's the end of the formal part of the presentation. A lot of questions have come in. We'll stay on as long as you all have interest to go through them. So first question. How often do you see expected value in use? Which is the last part of this. I would say expected value of the concepts we talked about here is the most complex. And I would actually say the first is using the attachment scores to find prospects. That example with the high-rated owners is the more common. And I would, your team needs to be ready for it. If I actually go back a few pages on that one to this page, this is sort of the major giving portfolio management, working with the major gift officers. I mean, these things sort of go in sequence too. I mean, you need to have a reasonable number of prospects that need to be set reasonably. You need to make sure that activities are happening. It's probably next important to make sure that if you're measuring visits, you actually measure visits across the pool. We've seen cases where, yeah, they're doing 75 visits, but it's 15 each with 3 people for 45 out of the 75. That's not what you want. You want the visits, but you want to have, if it's 100 prospects, get the 70% of them, 70 of them in a year, and then start moving into these things, which are a little richer. So I think it's all in balance, and there's teams that are ready for these expected values, and there's teams that would be overwhelming at this point. Yeah, there's some questions about I joined late. We're recording this. We'll have it available later. What is your best tips if you are understaffed in terms of development services but want to create affinity ratings for a large number of prospects for 30-plus fundraisers? I mean, I don't. This is meant to be informational and more of a tutorial, but that's exactly what our business does. We can come in and do these kinds of things pretty quickly and set you up with a system that keeps scoring them using the techniques we showed here. So, and as we do that work, our vision as a company is to empower our clients so they can do it going forward. So we're the kind of company that's going to go in, work with you, then get out of the way and let you go. But we'll make this PowerPoint available. A lot of this is just doable. We are a team that can come in and help you do it pretty quick. There's others out there as well. But I would urge, start with the simple approach and then build from there.
Okay, Doug, here's another question about the model that you built. What are good ranges for the information and robustness
good question.
Styles?
Let's go back to the model. So yeah, so we're going back in time a little bit. Here's the model we built. And again, we selected a target, you can see it here, of the 1,329 people who have actually given $100,000 and up. And before that, we had dropped to a base population, which were just the rated $100,000 and up. And we did that because we wanted to really assess the impact of engagement or attachment. and we wanted to get everything else as consistent as possible. And the easiest way was to grab at least the group that's rated to give at that level, then see what drives the difference in the actual giving. And then we took off all the explanatory factors, so we just looked at these ones that were related to attachment. The model gave us these weights, it gave us these lift buckets we discussed. It also gave us an information and a robustness indicator. This is from a statistical standpoint in R-squared. So this shows that the model believes that it explained 59% of the target. So 59% of the factors that made that people to give 100,000 versus didn't, I believe the model explained, which is okay. I mean, you sort of, the colors here indicate if it's down under 40%, it's probably not great. If it's way up here at the top, it may be overfitting. So this is actually good. And then the robustness means if you give it more information, will it predict results that it thinks are good. So you could actually predict off this and see who you would expect out of this group to be large donors given these characteristics, and it believes it has enough to do that. So to take this another level, information is basically, do we have enough fields in the data to explain the target? And we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 explanatory fields. It thinks it was pretty good. Robustness means, did we have enough rows? And we did. We had a reasonably good-sized target, a reasonably good-sized base, so it believes it's predictive given new data. And as I said, we could actually, if I click predict, it's actually going to use the model to create the scores I calculated manually. And actually, when we were building this, this score that came in, we compared it with our quick and dirty calculation. And there were a bunch of similarities. There were some differences because, again, the weighting here in the volunteers, 10 was not 10 times 1. And in fact, 10 was the same as 3 and 4 from an impact. So the model will handle that. Our rough and dirty didn't. But if I was to take the score I just put in, compare it with what we saw earlier, you'd see it. They're at least directionally similar, and you can do the same kinds of things with it. But the model, that if you had the modeling tool, you could just click predict, and it would score just the way I did.
Okay. Here's another question. This is very convincing on the macro level. But can any attachment algorithm incorporate specific attributes for certain prospects, such as the president being told by prospect X that he will not give anything until Dean Y retires?
Yes, so that's, yes, the modeling, three points in that. Our quick and dirty formula, which we built in the PowerPoint, would have trouble, this formula, where it go back a little bit, would have trouble doing something like that. I mean, this is literally basic arithmetic math. It's just, this kind of a raw score does not have the capacity to handle factors like that. The modeling would. That model I just built is fine if some of the factors are not numbers, they're strings, they're groups, all of that. So it handles all of that just fine. The next question is how would you actually, the third part is how would you code the data in? So yeah, if you can take the data and it gets coded that way, or in our tool you could, we've done this a bunch, you can match out on keywords. So if you have comment fields and there's some consistency to the comments, you can factor things out of it. We often do that with like events where if you want to actually look at, we've had one case with like 6,000 events in an event table, and you actually wanted to see did some events matter more than others, you can match out on keywords out of the event naming and create groupings out of it if you're savvy. So some of these other factors, like Kim, you just mentioned, that getting it actually coded in a way where you can differentiate is probably the harder part. Back up, the model will easily handle it once you get the data in a form. Our quick and dirty is probably pushing the limits of the quick and dirty.
Okay, great. Here's another question. Do you recommend creating separate scores for different categories of constituents? For example, alumni versus donor.
Yeah, that's important because you need to, well, the gross one is if you have entities and they include organizations and friends and non-alumni friends and spouses who aren't alums. Yeah, you need to split those groups apart and handle them separately because the things they will engage on and attach on are very different, and they're also given different opportunities. An organization is obviously going to be totally different than a person. An alum is going to have different opportunities than a friend. I mean, alum comes to reunions, played student sports, a friend didn't. So absolutely, when you create the scores, it needs to be on groups that have the similar opportunity to engage or attach. Good point. Good question. Yeah, we're open for more questions. Let's see, here's another one that just came in. Are there limits to how many entities you can work with something like this? The answer is no. I mean, again, you want to get some groupings, like you want to probably take alumni separately from friends and from parents and all of that. But you know, these approaches, obviously, this math can work on a database against whatever. Our modeling tools easily work with tens of millions of things. So, you know, this whole approach here, we started with 95,000 entities, but you know, the biggest donor or participant bases we've seen are tens of millions, and it works fine in this modeling tool. I mean, this model completed in 15 seconds. If you put 30 million things in, it might take 15 minutes, but it's it's certainly go grab a cup of coffee and come back at that point, and that's fast for a model to run. But these handle those numbers fine. So scale would not be an issue here. Next question.
Okay, here's one. At institutions where many alums marry each other, do you or should you group individuals and households in your model?
Ha-ha, the old household question. The challenge there is, so generally what we want to do is you would want to score the individuals. Just some summary. Some of our clients have households, most don't. The concept of a household is people who are basically one giving entity are grouped together, a husband and wife, and a son or a mom or something. So how you define that, typically it's married couples, and the couple could be both alums, or it could be an alum and just a spouse who's not an alum. So what we generally recommend there is score each of them separately because they do different things. The activities, the event participation is at an individual level. And then you probably want to look at the results. Either take the larger of the two and assume that that's the influence on the household, or add them together. And you could run a couple of quick tests and see which way is more accurate. I mean, I think normally we would add them together, but you could go either way. But that actually, and when we build these kinds of projects, we would usually have all the giving around the household, which is great because then you eliminate all the soft credit issues. The household would also include trusts and so forth as a giving entity. But then all the sports degrees would be at the individual level. So it's possible you would click on a household, and then you go to the degrees. You actually want to see the degrees for each of the people in the household, because if you're looking for like MBAs from top schools and the wife went there, you actually care about that, and maybe the husband did, but sort of the household thing gets a little tricky, but it's something we handle well and we've done a lot with. And the weighting, again, score individually and then either add or take the max or some combination like that to get them combined. Other questions? There's a question about the annual fund. Because the examples we gave, it's wanted more definition on the comment at the beginning about using this for segmenting messaging to the annual fund. Because the two examples we did were primarily major giving, finding prospects, and then doing expected values. In the annual fund, let's go back to the page over here. Go back into here. I'm going to go back into this project. So the way you might use this in an annual fund is, let's bring the project back up I was running. Again, the issue is if you look at these segments of attachment, the owners, the not engaged, the interested, and so forth, they're going to respond to different messages. And so instead of looking at ratings and so forth, you might actually just grab this group down here, which is the not engaged, and there's a lot of them. There's 51,000 in this case, and you're not going to send them messages about end of the year time to give because they haven't been giving. You're not going to send them messages about all the upcoming themes, reunions, homecoming, or they don't care about that obviously because they've never been to it. So this group is probably more difficult to figure out how to message to. Again, the thing we are seeing more and more, and it's evolving, but is the newsletters and the click-throughs, because you need some angle on these people. Could be a survey they responded to. It could be newsletters that they start clicking through on something. You now know what they're are interested in. So from an annual fund perspective, the messaging at this end of the spectrum, the non-engaged or the lightly engaged, needs to be more about interest areas. This group over here, your owners and your strong participants, say 8,000 in this case, they're interested in all the stuff that the school is doing, the excitement about the year end, the homecoming. So this does make a difference. And the problem we see is often on the annual fund side is consistent, the same messages is being sent to everybody, and you get towards the end of the year, and this group gets heavily overtouched with these repeated messages you haven't given, it's time to give, it's the end of the year. And this group is not going to respond to that. All you do with that group by sending them that message over and over again is you drive them further away. So often we see this segmentation not understood and not managed to. So that's basically in the annual fund. It's that tool to create different message segments with the caveat that the left side probably needs to be further split into interest areas to adequately reach them.
Okay, Doug, here's a question on the predictive modeling algorithms. What algorithms are used under the hood? Regression, decision tree, neural network, and can you have access to that to make changes?
Yeah, so the modeling tool that we use is from a partner called KXEN. And you could Google them. They're one of the better known algorithms out there. They're rich, robust. We use a multivariate regression. They use something called VAPNIC math on our website. On the homepage of our website, there's a predictive analytics. There's a bullet point. If you click on it, it goes to a page on predictive analytics. You can get a white paper and explore more fully what the algorithms are. But these are rich algorithms, and we've got a number of higher ed clients who use these and also use SAS or SPSS and would say they get equal or better results out of our algorithms. Now, what we've done here is we've masked a lot of the complexity. So this literally is the interface. So we have taken out the ability to modify the model, to use different models. We have one set of algorithms. It's a simple point-and-click interface. And the idea here is anybody who's reasonably savvy with the data can run these models. It actually did run 20 to 30 models behind the scenes. It's a very close-fitting model, and it picks the one that's the best fit and presents it. So to summarize, rich modeling algorithms packaged to be very simple, but we've taken out some of the complexity and the ability to be more flexible with them.
And Doug, as a follow-on to that, actually, there's a question about data preparation. And is there a data preparation module to take care of the data before feeding it to the algorithm?
Great question. So yeah, we've actually embedded two routines, the multivariate regression, and there's a data prep cleansing module. If you know KXEN, they're K2C and they're K2R algorithms. K2C does all the data prep. So it will, if it finds in modeling, like you have data that's extreme, so you have like a bunch of low donors, a few middle donors, and 3 that are given $50 million, if you take that linearly, it's not going to be great. So it'll figure that out and transform it into a log scale. It handles missing values, so it does the prep work for you. There's a whole bunch of writing on what it actually does, but that's another set of things where in most modeling tools, you have to do a lot of data prep. This is really rich. It just does it for you behind the scenes. That's the benefit. The detractor is you can't adjust what it's doing. It's just doing it. But our view is you can get models turned around quicker, and you don't need to be a modeling expert to do it. If you want to be a modeling expert, SAS or SPSS, there's some really rich modeling tools, or the KXEN raw package, which does expose all of that, is also a great tool to work with.
Okay, in healthcare, have you found it useful to designate if someone was an inpatient or outpatient when using patient as a factor in affinity rating?
Yeah, so in healthcare, assuming you can get access to the data, there's a variety of HIPAA issues on what the actual patient condition was. The more you can get, the better. And yes, we have found that inpatient, outpatient matters. What they actually went through matters. So again, the caveat is sometimes that data varies legally what you're allowed to get, but the more of that, the better. Again, you could start simple with some basically department categories. You can start with inpatient, outpatient, some of the high-level metrics, and obviously the names are masked. You got a problem identifying who they are. So at some point, you actually, the ICD-9 code, the disease category, all of that stuff gets harder to actually get access to. You'd like to have it, but it's at some point on that side of the equation, it's really almost impossible to get.
This is a question about capacity. What are some good capacity indicators, and how do you incorporate capacity into the attachment score?
Yeah, we usually take capacity and attachment separately. And we don't put capacity into the attachment score. The attachment score, we're looking for factors that are opt-in indicators of engagement or attachment. So, if they make a gift, that's a choice they make. If they make consistently making gifts, that's a choice they make. If they come to an event, that's a choice they make. If they click through on a newsletter, that's a choice they make. Then there's a whole set of characteristics about who they are and their level of life. Capacity would be one of those. It's not, that is more an intrinsic to them. So that matters, but that's a separate thing. And where they come together is in selecting prospects, looking at ask amounts, all that. You want capacity as a factor, which is what they could give, and then attachment is how much they are disposed towards your institution. Sort of a short one on capacity. The simplest is zip code. I mean, that is, if all you have is zip code, that's actually not so bad because it differentiates people dramatically. And it's granular enough that if you take a city like Chicago, it's got a bunch of zip codes, and it is a measure of wealth, and you can put estimates on it. Obviously, that's one where the outside wealth screeners can add a ton of value. We partner with a group called True Givers. There's a whole bunch of others because they look at a bunch of assets on each person and then provide a pretty rich capacity ranking back. So, we would recommend that's an area where going outside really does help because you don't have that data inside. Although, again, caveat, if all you have is zip code, that is at least a place to get started with.
Okay, here's another question. Can you establish category weights by measuring them historically against donors in your top giving clubs? So, for example, if there are more donors in your top club who were student government officers versus Greeks, should student government leadership be a heavier weighted scoring category for high capacity prospects who have not given?
Yeah, that's yes. I'm going to go back to here. That's how you kind of get from wherever the page was, the small number of factors to the high number of factors, because these things don't all do the same. Like I just, volunteer positions, just in here, we have done, so this, in our model, this clearly mattered, was the most important factor. The more you did, the better. If you then ran that model, instead of against the entity table, if you ran it against the committee or the volunteer committee table, it's going to then bucket these things, class agent, reunion chair, high school interviewing. And what you will invariably find is, I bet if I did this and it was a highly selective school, class agent's going to come out strongly positive, reunion chair probably highly positive, high school interviewing can actually be negative because it's frustrating to most people. They interview these candidates that don't get in. And so, yeah, the granular down is going from this to this is much better. And then for targeting, it's important. You do not probably want to target your top prospects towards high school interviewing if you're a highly selective school because it's usually frustrating. Whereas class agents and reunion chairs are these team-oriented things that bring people, people enjoy that and actually get more engaged. So great question, and that's sort of as you move from, the 5 factors to the, let's not say it's 190, the 30 factors, that's the kind of stuff that starts mattering. But again, it's, this is going to get you, every time we do it, 60, 65% of the way there. Yeah, this will get you, you're never going to get 100%, but this will get you 85, 90 if you do enough of these. But this is the stuff that could take a really long time to figure out. So I said it 7 times, maybe 8. Great to get going with this and then over time move to this.
Okay, I know we're coming up on the hour, but maybe we can squeeze one more in. This is a question about the use of social media data. And do you use social media data to calculate attachments, and will you do that if you are able to collect that data about your constituents?
Yeah, and there's more and more of that coming. It's still a little bit rugged, but the thing about social media, and so if you look at tweets or if you look at posts, there are now firms that do sentiment ratings on them. So if you invested in that and you could get tweets, you would collect tweets about your institution and sentiment ratings, because they'll rate it. The sentiment ratings go from things like highly positive to moderately positive to neutral to somewhat negative to strongly negative. Yeah, that is another opt-in measure of engagement, attachment, liking, whatever the words would be. So that's coming more and more. It's still a little bit rugged. I've not seen much of that done in fundraising. We do work in consumer packaged goods and other industries where that's pretty important. You got a product and you want to, if something happens, you want to get a feel for what the sentiment is on the tweets and what it's doing to your the rest of your marketing efforts. And there's actually influencers on tweets that you can then get access to help counter them. So there's actually, once you start getting that, you can then start managing it. But again, I've seen very little of that in play in the fundraising space so far. I suspect you'll see that evolve because it's happening in the consumer packaged goods. The top marketing companies are using that extensively, and all these sentiment scoring things are getting better and better. So I see a lot of people still on. I know we're at the 30-minute plus the 30-minute Q&A. If we have some more questions, we can stay on. Last call for questions. I see there's a lot of people still on. If you don't, you follow up directly with us. If there's questions that we didn't find, we will get back to you. And I would just close by saying this is an area that has a lot of potential, and I would urge you to do the quick and dirty, simple, get something running, and then refine it over time. It doesn't need to be perfect, and that just getting some of the stuff we talked about today out and going can have huge value. And we'll make this available, the slides of some of the math. If you want some help with this, we're here. We'll give you some assistance. Obviously, at some point, we're a for-profit company, so we'll have to do an engagement. But we like this whole topic area. We've done a lot of work in it, and we'd be glad to provide some feedback. We're also interested in knowing what you're doing with attachment scores. So we'll do a follow-up with the links to the webinar once it's recorded, and if we'll have a short survey. We'd love to hear what's actually going on more broadly and get some feedback. But thank you for your time and attention. Appreciate it, and have a great day. Take care.